Welcome back, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. Born on this date in 1913, civil rights activist Rosa Parks of Tuskegee. Also born on this date in 1943, we have two, both Swampers with the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. Born on this day in 1943, keyboardist Barry Beckett of Birmingham and guitarist Jimmy Johnson of Sheffield. Today we're going to talk education in Alabama a little bit. Rebecca Griesbach of the Alabama Education Lab is back on the show to break down the latest Nation's Report Card scores. That's coming up in a few minutes. First, let's talk about opening day for the legislative session, the passing of a former state lawmaker and U.S. ambassador, and a familiar face who's taken over the football program at West Alabama. My name's Ike Morgan, and we're down in Alabama. The regular season for Alabama state politics opens today on Goat Hill. Governor Kay Ivey will reveal her priorities this evening when, for the 8th time, she gives the State of the State speech at the Capitol on the opening day of the legislative session. AL.com's Mike Kaysen reports that Ivey is going to make crime fighting her top priority for 2025. Look for proposals intended to support law enforcement, discourage crime, of course, and make criminal justice reforms. The impetus behind this is the rise in violent crime in some areas, including in the capital city, but most notably, the 151 homicides in Birmingham last year that broke the city's all-time record. Now, the Republicans are still fully in charge, which gives Ivey's priorities a strong advantage. House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter, a Rainsville Republican, said he's working with the governor on a crime package that'll be introduced early in the session. The Senate will need to elect its leader. That's the president pro tem. That should happen today, and the position will almost certainly go to Garland Gudger, a Cullman Republican. Gudger said that besides crime, look for multiple bills on immigration. He indicated they would support crackdowns on illegal immigration, and particularly the removal of violent criminals, but he also expressed a need to be supportive of migrants who are here legally. As Mike had talked about when he was on the show, leading lawmakers said that a lottery, casinos, and sports betting are not priorities entering the session. Former lawmaker and ambassador William J. Cabanis Jr. of Birmingham passed away over the weekend. Cabanis served in the State House of Representatives and Senate from 1978 through 1990. As a Republican serving during the era of Democratic domination at the State House, Cabanis was perhaps ahead of the curve among conservatives evolving from Democrat to Republican. He ran for the U.S. Senate against incumbent Democrat Howell Heflin in 1990. It wasn't a particularly close election, but Cabanis was chasing an upset that would have turned the seat red 6 years before Jeff Sessions won it. It also would have deprived us of seeing Chris Farley's take on Senator Heflin on Saturday Night Live during the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. But that campaign also might be credited with elevating Cabanis's name nationally. President George H.W. Bush campaigned for him, and later President George W. Bush would make him U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic. Now, before his political career, he served as an Army Airborne Ranger and founded a metal machining company. Bill Cabanis was 86 years old. Former Alabama strength coach Scott Cochran has taken over as head football coach at West Alabama, reports AL.com's Matt Stahl. Now, if you remember Cochran at all, you remember the intensity and vocal volume he brought to workouts during much of the Nick Saban era. He left the Tide 5 years ago to coach special teams on Kirby Smart's staff at Georgia. He left there after the 23 season, dealt with addiction issues himself, and has spent time speaking to teams through his nonprofit, American Addiction Recovery Association. And now he's the head Tiger. West Alabama was 9-2 last season under Brett Gilliland, who has moved into the athletic director's office. This is Cochran's first head coaching job. Hey, let's take a quick break. Then we're going to come back and see how Alabama is trending by some educational measures. Y'all stay with us. Hey, thanks for staying with us, everybody. Alabama students, fourth graders specifically, a few years ago on the nation's report card, if I'm right, finished at the very bottom of the state rankings in math. Now, that's not near the bottom, not 49th out of 50th or 50th, including DC. It's extremely last. And we were also near the bottom in reading on that same assessment. Now, last place finish on an important assessment, even if it's not intended to really rank states, it can stay with you psychologically. It's easy to remember how we did. It's jarring. It becomes a reference point for how's Alabama doing. Well, since then, there have been more national assessments, including some that came out last week. So we figured it was a perfect time to bring back reporter Rebecca Griesbach, who covers education for AL.com and the Alabama Education Lab. Welcome to the studio, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you've been reporting on the nation's report card. And when I was a student, I was always nervous around report card time. So go ahead, rip the Band-Aid off and tell us what the data looks like here.
Yeah, I mean, I think our state leaders are always pretty nervous too. And I actually was around a lot of those folks when the results dropped on Wednesday morning. And it was like Christmas morning for a lot of them because the news was good for Alabama. It was not good for the rest of the nation. And I think that's why we've seen such a dramatic climb in those scores these past few years since the pandemic, is because I mean, just kind of to put it simply, we have held steady in reading and math, especially fourth grade. Eighth grade is still a challenge, but we've held steady and even improved a little bit, where while pretty much everywhere else is declining, and has yet to regain lost ground since 2019.
And that's not just like compared to other states with us moving up in rankings because they're declining, but in math particularly, we actually, the gross total number, we improved against ourselves, right?
Right, we did. We improved by about 6 points, and which is huge. I think it was the highest gain in the nation over that time period.
And with Eric Mackey said, the state superintendent actually said he expected to see reading slip. Now, what had him worried about that?
Right. So, I mean, we've made several changes to our reading tests, but historically, the NAEP is a really hard test. And experts, the folks who are making that test, they don't apologize for that. But it measures a lot more kind of advanced comprehension skills than those kind of basic skills. And so a lot of state tests, you might be familiar, we always write about state results every year, right? And a lot of state tests are, by comparison, a little bit easier than the NAEP. And so that's why it's so important to have this national assessment so that you can kind of see not only your own growth over time ranked by the same sort of standards, but also, how that growth stands out among other states. But anyway, so Alabama, over the past few years, we've had some pretty big reading and math reforms. And with that has come adjustments to those standards. And the fourth graders who were tested on the NAEP this year actually dipped quite a bit on the state test. And so I think that's kind of where that shock comes from, is, maybe these standards that we have now are actually aligned or, better. I don't know if I say better than the NAEP, but they're getting harder and a little more accurate.
Okay. Now, the last time that the nation's report card came out was 2019. Obviously, a lot happened within a year or two of that. Uh, our ability to kind of hold steady with this group of students that were in fourth grade last year. Oh, well, hold steady, actually improve versus the nation declining. Uh, is there a sense of, and I, there may be too much speculation in this to start with. Does that reflect on how well Alabama did during the pandemic, or maybe how well we recovered after the pandemic for early education?
Yeah, so the last test that we took was 2022, and then the test before that was 2019. So just to give you a sense of when the tests were taken, no one was taking the test in, the middle, the beginning of the pandemic when a
Hmm.
lot of schools were immediately shut down. Um, but some key things happened. I mentioned the Literacy Act and the Numeracy Act. Those were both passed around that time, and so it's been a couple of years for both of those to really take effect. And
Hmm.
so, a lot of the supports, putting math coaches and reading coaches in schools, changing, improving the rigor of our state tests and some of our materials that we use. Those are things that definitely state leaders are pointing to as, maybe those reforms are starting to pay off now, especially among those younger students. It's also a reason that folks are pointing to those eighth grade scores not improving so much, is because there hasn't been um, much dedicated support yet to those older students. They're thinking about adding more soon, but I think that's one reason that people are kind of pointing to the difference in scores for fourth grade versus some of those older students, and why it's been kind of so dramatic for us.
Now, those eighth graders would have been not the same fourth graders who took it in 2019, but sort of in the same age group. So
Right.
you're said they haven't had those kind of standards put to them at this point. So there may be a thing where they're behind, and I guess is what you're saying. And they're fixing to hit high school. Some of them are in high school, so we still got time, right?
Right, right. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think that the fourth graders now, they were kindergartners when
Mm-hmm.
COVID hit. And so, across the nation, they were missing a lot of those foundational skills that you build, like you learn to read, and a lot of them were, out of school during that time. But I think with the reforms that we've added, just that additional support, it's
Mm-hmm.
probably helped to kind of you know, bridge that gap just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
while everyone else just kind of fell through.
Hmm. Now, I understand that you work in Alabama and not Louisiana. I was geeking out on the numbers a little bit, and I'll just bring this up for whatever it's worth. I noticed that Louisiana fourth graders also did better when compared to itself. It seemed like Alabama and Louisiana were both the two states making the jump. I wonder if at some point we hit upon a comparison or contrast that maybe they pass some of similar bills to hold students accountable in reading and math. I don't know. Have you heard anything along those lines?
Well, Louisiana has also been doubling down on the science of reading. So, teaching kids the right way to read, focusing on phonics, and that has helped a lot, experts have said. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. I think that two, southern states are kind of leading as far as gains go. Mississippi wasn't really pointed out this year, but over time has also seen a lot of big gains on the NAEP, and they have had long-standing reforms, especially with reading. So,
Yeah, it's easy to start out with the joke. Well, when we were last, we were even behind Mississippi, but Mississippi was already kind of looked like it was up there about where we are now, and they've done all right as well. I gave you a total out to say I have no idea what Louisiana's up to, but you came in and you nailed the question anyway. So
Yeah, well, Alabama and Louisiana were big talkers during a lot of the press calls, and everyone wanted to know what are they doing, and that seemed to be a key thing that experts were pointing to is you know they're making a dedicated effort to improve reading and math, and when you put money toward that and the right supports in schools, it can pay off.
okay, okay. Uh, this um, Nation's report card. It's just fourth and eighth grade, correct?
Right.
So next time we'll see these fourth graders, or well, their classmate, their peers, a year or two off, take the eighth grade assessment. Okay.
Right. It's typically every 2 years, and then it's a sample, so it's not like every school in the state takes it.
Okay.
I think it's like 3%, something like that. But they make sure that the students who are taking it, the schools that are taking it, are representative of just kind of the demographic makeup.
Hmm.
But and there's also a science and I believe a history test too. But these are the reading and the math are the big ones.
Okay. Okay. Am I not asking you something that we found out from this report card?
Let me see. I think the biggest or kind of a big narrative that we've been seeing lately is and nationwide is that the kids who are doing really well are doing even better. But then it's those struggling kids,
Hmm.
those low performers that have really, really dipped down. Like it's those kids who are scoring below basic, which is basically kind of those foundational skills,
Okay.
are that percent is like higher than it's ever been since the test history nationwide. In Alabama, that's still the case. Those low performers aren't doing as poorly as everyone else, but the gaps are also getting wider, and I think that's a cause for alarm because it might indicate that some of the supports that we are using aren't targeting those really low performers and those kids who need it the most. So I think that's going to be a big talking point moving forward is like how do we drill down, how do we get those kids, a lot of them are high needs kids, economically disadvantaged,
Hmm.
like how do we get them the support that they need so that they can also rise to the top. I think we're looking at it, and the non-economically disadvantaged kids were like fourth in the nation in Alabama. So the rankings are definitely based on
Wow.
an average,
Yeah.
um, but
Yeah.
but yeah, it varies. I mean, for every student group. So
Gosh, that's where averages and um, you know generalizations get you is the opportunities there, and kids are holding up, buoying the average. But yeah, if you're not reaching everybody, um, then you're losing as well.
right, yeah, I was talking with an expert today or the other day, and she said averages hide a lot of ugly, and that's definitely true. When you start to dive deeper into the numbers, you see where those gaps are, and
Yeah.
some of it's pretty sad. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I presume that's on the individual level, and probably brings some entire schools and school systems into it, where you have four areas.
right.
Well, you also did another story recently on um, retirees, educators who are retired and have not been having their pensions keep up with cost of living and that sort of thing. Can you talk real briefly about that? I mean, since I have you and we're talking about education, I know there's a lot of teachers listening to this.
Sure, yeah. I mean, our educator retirees haven't gotten a cost of living increase since I think 2007.
Okay.
And so, meanwhile, you know, um, their cost of living has, increased tremendously. I think,
Hasn't it though?
the power that they've had is like, it's like 66%, something like that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, there was a big, and I'm sure you've talked about this before, but the lottery was a big topic last year. It's not looking like that's going to come back up again, but what lawmakers are saying basically is we have to have a new funding stream to fund these cost of living increases, and
Mhm.
it's just not looking likely that that's going to happen. So there's really not much else to say about that. I
Yeah.
mean, it's definitely something we'll be watching. We'll be watching for, if a teacher's raise gets announced. Typically that happens when the budget gets approved,
Hmm.
kind of toward the end of the session.
Right.
Um, Ivy's giving her State of the State address tomorrow, and, maybe there will be something in there, but it's not looking likely.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to mention that 2007 really popped off the page to me because you're not living the same life now as you did in 2007.
I know. I was in elementary school, so I,
Okay.
um,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean,
Rebecca, is there anything else going on your beat or in your world you want to tell us about? I'm so glad you stopped by and did this with us.
yeah, no, thank you. We'll have a little bit more on the NAPE, kind of looking at what's next.
Okay.
Is more money the answer? What are they doing to look at those older students and help with that? Um, School funding is
Mhm.
going to be a big topic. We're supposed to get some answers on that hopefully this week. Um, but I think those are going to be kind of the big topics in the legislature this year for education.
Okay. Okay. Well, I tell you what, I'll let you go so you can get back to your other work if you promise to maybe come by and talk about education budget when that comes down.
Sure.
All right, thanks. And Rebecca Griesbach, everybody, in show notes, I'm going to leave links to her recent stories and a list of all her stories. And thanks everybody for taking the time to listen to us today. We are going to be back here again tomorrow. Until then, y'all come by and see us anytime you want to on the World Wide Web at al.com.